I began actively studying spirituality close to 25 years ago, and when I say studying, what I mean specifically is reading, but also attending lectures or watching videos of spiritual teachers or gurus. And back then, I was like a starving child, really hungry for spiritual understanding, for knowledge and information. And at one point, I had even gotten a job at a used bookstore, which allowed me to get my hands on tons of books, sometimes even some really obscure, hard to find books. And I was hoarding so many books that my bedroom was practically a library. And sometimes I actually found it challenging to read an entire book from cover to cover because I was always finding something else that I wanted to read. Sometimes I would be juggling a handful of different books all at the same time. It was comparative to someone who was writing a report for school where you have a stack of books that you're going through for information on one specific topic, except I wasn't doing this for school. I was just simply obsessed, you could say, with the desire to understand the nature of reality, the purpose of existence, and all that sort of thing. And so I was constantly reading all the time, anything I could get my hands on. And not just spirituality, but anything related to spirituality. Religion, philosophy, occultism, metaphysics, quantum physics. And somewhere around 15 years into all of this, I had to take a step back and reassess my life. So leading up to that time, I had become very knowledgeable intellectually. And if you were to sit down and have a conversation with me back then about anything to do with spirituality or religion or metaphysics or what have you, I could explain things very much in depth and speak very eloquently as if I really knew what it was I was talking about. And it would have been very easy to mistake me as someone who is very wise, spiritually advanced, except of course I was essentially just regurgitating things that other people had said, concepts, ideas, beliefs, speculations, and so on. And in fact, I had a friend at the time who was also very hungry for spiritual knowledge, but was much newer to all of it than I was. I had been in the game for many years, longer than he had, and he was just starting to dip his toes in the water. So I had already compiled a massive collection of information that he wasn't familiar with. And so this person would often come to me for information, to pick my brain, to get answers. And I was very good at being able to answer his questions. And so our friendship had developed into a sort of pseudo guru-disciple relationship. Not in any formal way, but it definitely had that feel to it, that he was dependent upon me for information. And I really liked it. I liked being someone who was looked up to as some sort of authority, some sort of expert, some sort of spiritual teacher. And of course, it was really all about my ego. And what happened with that situation was that this person was coming to me for specific information, which I was eager to give, and a lot of it was metaphysical information, a lot of speculative, conceptual sort of stuff. What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of God? Why are we here? And so on. But at the same time, this person had a lot of personal issues, problems, illusions, unhealthy behavior patterns, and so on. And a lot of that was having a negative effect on their relationships, including our own friendship. I often found myself getting frustrated with this person for so many things that they would do unconsciously. But this brought me to a point where I began to realize that they had a lot of personal areas that needed attention, and that they were essentially using all of this knowledge seeking as a distraction from addressing those areas. And I was playing right into that game by giving them all this intellectual information, metaphysical concepts and such that really had no real relevance to what they truly needed in order to grow and evolve and wake up. I was just helping them to distract from the real inner work. So essentially, I wasn't really helping them at all. I was contributing to their delusion, to their perpetuation of their sleepwalking. And when I realized this, I felt like a fool. I was really disappointed with myself, but it also forced me to step back and look at my own life, because I was really doing the same thing. I was using all this information, all this intellectual stimulation to distract myself from really going deep, from having to acknowledge my own bullshit, my own illusions, my own problems and issues. And when I stepped back and took a broader look at my life, what I saw was very disturbing, because in all those years of studying spirituality, while I had gained a great deal of intellectual knowledge and information, I hadn't really made any real progress at all. My life and the quality of my life had not improved. I still had all of the same issues I started out with, but I had sort of repressed a lot of it, turned my attention away from it, fooled myself into thinking I was a lot more enlightened than I actually was. Because the reality was that my life was a mess. My internal world was a mess, and there was all sorts of uncomfortable stuff there, anxiety, depression, insecurity, and so on. Things I didn't really want to deal with. All these things which had gone unresolved because I hadn't given them any attention. I was busy distracting myself with this intellectual pursuit of information. I was using spirituality as a means to direct my focus away from all of that, so I wouldn't have to look at it. And at the same time, to build up my ego, to convince myself that I was very advanced in spirituality because I had all this information, which had become a substitute for genuine insight and realization. And when I realized all of this, it stopped me in my tracks. Suddenly, I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. It seemed like all the years leading up to that moment had been wasted, had been spent in a cloud of self-delusion, and I was feeling disillusioned about spirituality, about my path, about all the information I had collected, because it hadn't really gotten me anywhere. And so I just gave up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from there. All I knew was that I couldn't continue the way I had been going. And one of the things that happened was that I lost my taste for reading about spirituality. I still had all my books, but when I would pick one up and begin to read, it just seemed like dry, empty information. And even if I picked up a book I had never read, it was essentially the same information I was already familiar with. There was nothing new under the sun. It was all the same information being expressed by different people. And I already understood all of that intellectually. What I was missing was the experiential understanding. And so I realized that I really needed to do some real soul searching, some in-depth introspection, to put aside all this intellectual information and start giving my attention to experience, to life, to get out of my head. I needed to get out of this intellectual, conceptual thinking. And as I began to pay more attention to life, I began to realize that all the lessons that I really needed in order to grow, in order to awaken, were right there in front of me, specifically tailored to my personal needs. Not to what I thought I needed, but to what I really needed. I began to realize that life itself, all the circumstances I had found myself in, all the challenges and difficulties, could be utilized as lessons, as opportunities for personal growth. And that real wisdom, real insight, realization comes from within, not that it can be found in any book or teacher or guru or any external source. All of that is just information, but if we really want to gain any real wisdom, that can only come from our own realization. And so still to this day, I don't take interest in reading books on spirituality. Not that I'm against it, I just find so much more value in paying attention to everyday, ordinary life. I do feel that books and teachers have value, that they can be very helpful in our spiritual growth, but only if we utilize them in the proper way. Because as I can attest to, it's all too easy to use them as a distraction from the real inner work. So I would recommend, for example, to take those things as secondary to life experience. In other words, pay attention to the lessons that life is offering you. Recognize what those lessons are, and then you might turn to someone else to get some clarity or perspective on the situation once you know what the situation is. So maybe life is offering you an opportunity to let go of some attachment. And when you recognize that, certainly you might want to turn to someone for perspective on how to go about that process. But if your lesson is to let go of attachment and you're reading about crystals or sacred geometry and all your attention is on that, then you're essentially distracting yourself. But if you genuinely want to wake up, to grow, to progress, to find contentment or peace of mind or whatever it may be, to gain real wisdom, insight, to have some profound realization, then you're not going to find that in a book or from any external source. You can only find that within. So put down a book every once in a while and pay attention to what's right in front of you. Pay attention to life, because everything you really need to learn is right there in your everyday experience. And the wisdom to see it and understand it is right there within you. If you find this content valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.